The SAFE PCI trial for women represents several firsts, and so in order to understand some of those, we're with Dr. Mitchell Krucoff, who is presenting SAFE PCI data here at ESC in Barcelona and publishing a SAFE PCI for Women paper in JACC Interventions from the Duke Clinical Research Institute in Durham. Always happy to talk to you guys. Let's start with some background first and some of the rationale for SAFE PCI for Women.
Sure, Mark, and it's really a pleasure to discuss because there were actually several different levels that brought the SAFE PCI rationale together. One is just in the United States, we're sort of behind the rest of the world in the rate of uptake of radial intervention, and there are some technical challenges to the learning curve of radial intervention. So this was a way of looking at whether some of the many suggestions that radial intervention might in fact be kinder to patients or more preferred by patients, have other potential safety benefits like lower bleeding rates and the downstream effects of those bleeding rates on other kinds of outcomes in a prospective randomized design compared to femoral arteriotomy, where frankly in the US we have not only a lot of experience but also continuously evolving technology of approaches to how to best and most safely manage an arteriotomy in the leg. So it was a very dynamic time, and the randomization of one access site versus another took sort of a public health-oriented effort, which was mediated through a Duke FDA public-private partnership, the Cardiac Safety Research Consortium, that kind of brought people together. So the science was really in our USA theater. Does radial and femoral play out comparatively with safety and comfort and patient preference the way it appears to in the rest of the world? That was a key feature.
Now the part of this that I thought was fascinating was not just the data, which we'll talk about in a moment, but it's the way the clinical trial was conducted. We had a cover story at Cardiol World News, Extreme Makeover Clinical Trials Edition. That's where we're going. And describe how this trial was conducted.
Well, let me mention one other side to this, just because we're very focused on, again, one of the other features of SAFE PCI was it was for women. And the rationale behind the study, and in fact what drove the equipoise of essentially the country's most experienced radialists to be willing to randomize, was that we have more complications, more bleeding, more discomfort if you are a woman going to a cath lab than if you're a man, and we have zero, count them, zero randomized interventional trials focused just on women. So the other driving part of this, just from the science side, was to completely concentrate on the degree an arteriotomy plays out for women who are unlucky enough to need invasive catheterization. So the third level was the point you just made, and that is that the structure of this trial also emerged from a time when I think many of us, whether it's the regulatory authorities or public health focus, the National Institutes of Health, professional societies, or practicing clinicians who do research, recognize that our traditional way of doing research, where you build an entire infrastructure just for that trial and then launch it and maintain separate staff just for that trial, in the modern economy, not only can you not do that anymore, but in fact by rebuilding trial infrastructure for every single trial, you actually fragment the ability to pool data in ways that make us much more aware of key questions like rare but catastrophic safety events. So clearly a third feature here was the first study in the United States of America to do a prospective randomized trial using an existing ongoing registry infrastructure. And of course, in this case, that was the CATH PCI National Cardiovascular Data Registry, which is the American College of Cardiology's, our professional society registry.
So what did you find in the data, first off?
So as we're limited for time, I'll take the brief version. The trial was actually interrupted by the Data and Safety Monitoring Board, not for safety concerns, but for concerns of futility. So we had planned an 1,800 patient PCI women study, randomized 1-to-1 radiofemoral, with, from the NCDR, actually a predicted bleeding rate, which is the primary endpoint, BARC 2, 3, and 5 bleeding categories. From NCDR, we expected about an 8% event rate, and would then have, if we have a 50% reduction in the wrist compared to the leg, 90% power, more than 90% power, with 1,800 patients randomized undergoing PCI. And for the US practice with so much ad hoc PCI, we were hoping that wise cardiologists would be able to identify a female cohort where we would enroll 3,000 to find 1,800, or roughly 2 out of every 3 patients who would say, this patient's going to have coronary disease, so we're going to go on to PCI. In fact, it turned out to be the opposite, humbling as to how bad we are in predicting in women using non-invasive means until you get them into the cath lab whether or not they're going to have coronary disease. So when we were at about 1,100 patients randomized, the DSMC looked at the event rate in an unplanned meeting and contacted us and said, we think you should stop the trial because the event rate overall is so low that you're going to never be able to show a significant difference. And again, no safety concerns, just you're not going to get there kind of message. We had a quality of life study we were very dedicated to doing. The Office of Women's Health from FDA was a part of helping to use this unique approach to women. So we actually continued enrollment to a total number of patients just under 1,800 and then stopped. Again, not 1,800 PCI patients, 1,800 overall. And ironically, when we analyzed the data, while in fact the overall event rate, rather than 8%, was closer to 3%, the treatment effect, which the initial power calculation expected, which was a 50% reduction, we were looking at more than a 60% reduction. So that in the primary cohort, even well short of the original plan, the PCI cohort, the p-value is about 0.1 with about a 60% reduction in radial versus femoral. And the overall cohort, the patients who were just diagnostic cath and PCI together, which was a prospective secondary group, was statistically significantly better. So we had interrupted early, but based on not just an event rate, but a treatment effect. Right. The event rate was lower, but the treatment effect was higher. So it's a little squishy to talk about. Rigorously, it's a negative trial. On the other hand, if we had completed the trial, would it really have been futile? Important to say, though, is that the other effectiveness endpoint, which was conversion from the wrist to the, and need to convert from the wrist to the leg, was clearly higher in the radial group. And so, again, what we have is a trial that stirs up a lot of questions more than it provides a lot of answers in the actual benefits to women.
So what do you think is the take-home message, as tough as that may be?
Well, there's one thing there's no lack of clarity about, which is if you ask the patients which they would prefer the next time around, there was a very profound preference that they would go radial. So I think from the patient's point of view, whatever the heck we were measuring, their end view was, if I have to go through this again, you're going to do it from my wrist. We have, as a follow-up and in draft right now, the quality of life data, which also will add some insight into that. And then I think we just have to keep doing the work, hopefully, more efficiently and more easily by using this kinds of means where, frankly, about 3/4 of the data that was required for this trial were directly electronically imported from what was already being entered into the NCDR. So the workload with this type of randomized, registry-based infrastructure at least makes the follow-up of these kinds of open questions less expensive, more efficient, and therefore more doable.
Well, I think you've pointed out the fact that how many investigators over a short period of time have just given up. People who've been investigators on major trials in the past 5, 10 years ago, they're not doing them anymore. And part of it is they're frustrated, it's very difficult, the paperwork is extensive. All things that are corrected to some degree by the way you conducted this trial.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. Nobody could agree more. In fact, in the whole universe of medical device evaluation, which is my focus, but even in much broader areas, Sentinel, PCORInet, there are many other efforts to look at essentially bridging a chasm that we have allowed to occur from early days of being pristine, but also having lots of money to build a separate universe called the clinical research universe, completely separate from our clinical care universe. And frankly, as we see electronic health records and so many electronic means now, where it's really a question of linking and standardizing definitions and data fields, making everybody comfortable that important things like data security and privacy and ownership of data, intellectual property involved in data are still managed well. The notion that for every single clinical trial, we should build a new case report form and a completely new database. We take the illusion, and the NCDR is such a fantastic example, of if you have more than 90% of the cath labs in the country entering 100% of their interventional procedural data already into an electronic database. This is the Mississippi. This is a river of electronic information. You can float a lot of individual, prospective, randomized boats on a river that large without having to build the river every single time you want to do a clinical trial. And that's the vision that I think the college has been very supportive of, that with the MD EpiNet program on the FDA side as another public-private partnership like the Cardiac Safety Research Consortium that gave life to SAFE PCI for women, it takes a dialogue. We need the industry to understand how this works. If we're going to use this for device evaluation, we need the regulatory authorities to be confident that the information is high quality, that it can be reliably used. And we need the clinical community to catch on, but let me tell you, for the first experience, site coordinators figured out very quickly that for every patient they enrolled, having the NCDR already contain clinical descriptors, concomitant medications, procedural details, and index hospitalization outcomes reduced their case report form misery by 65 to 70%. Wow. And they enrolled in this trial like gangbusters. We were ahead of our enrollment curve before we had activated 50% of our ultimately 60 sites. I've been doing clinical research for 30 years. I've never been in a trial where the metrics reach that level. So I think we're going in the right direction, and I think operationally there's nothing fuzzy about this trial. The clinical impact, we have some additional work to do because this trial stopped early. Right. Unfortunately, I would say, but it's due diligence, and the key is that going forward is easier if we do it in a similar kind of infrastructure. And the infrastructure as a proof of concept, first randomized study dedicated solely to women in the United States of America in interventional cardiology, and the first randomized trial using a registry base. We're very proud of SAFE PCI for women.
Congratulations. Now, I was really happy when I saw the paper at ACC, I think it was last year, and you've done a tremendous amount of work on this, and I appreciate the effort. And the paper itself...
So for facts, I have to correct you there, young man. It was actually presented at TCT.
It was TCT? I go to all of these, I forget. But the paper itself is in JACC Interventions. Yes, that I got right. And we're with Mitch Krucoff, and for a variety of other reports from ESC, please check out Cardial Source World News. I'm Executive Editor Rick McGuire.